I'm super excited about this session. Uh, this is one of my favorite stories with the Kuali Build product with the Davidson School. And we have um, the masters of Kuali Build at Davidson here with us today. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Just a couple of housekeeping things. This is kind of a broadcast webinar, so everyone's on mute. There is an ability to do questions and answers, and we encourage you to ask questions through the discussion so that we could feed those into the discussions as they fit on the given topic. And then we'll respond to those as we try to do that. The presentation is being recorded, and we'll be sending recordings to everyone afterwards. So let's get started. First of all, I'm Tadd. I'm one of the guys behind the Kuali Build product. It's kind of my baby. I wrote some of the first lines of code 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been one of the key players helping shepherd it into becoming a real product and growing up to be a real boy. And so I'll be facilitating our discussion today with our people from Davidson. And so I will let our friends from Davidson introduce themselves. JD, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm JD Mills. I manage the digital transformation team at Davidson. Let's see. My role within Kuali Build, I guess all of us are collectively the product owners for Build right now. So I do everything from making forms to writing integrations to just helping the Kuali Build implementation project move along the tracks. So I'll pass it on to Tessa.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Tessa Jones, a digital transformation analyst. Completely agree with the things JD said, and we tinker a lot in Build. I'll pass it to Luke.
I'm Luke Ashelman. I'm Tyless today and have been for many, many months. And I'm one of the DX analysts here at Davidson. And yeah, primarily work a lot with getting data out of Kuali Build and sending it into other systems.
I'm Blake. I'm a recent Davidson grad, and I'm currently completing a 1-year fellowship with the DX team, which has been fantastic so far. So I work with them in our work with Kuali Build every 2 weeks, working on migrating web apps to Build. My favorite thing about Kuali is definitely the integrations. You can just make anything happen with the right piece of code.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing slides here so we can see your faces. Let me start with just looking back to the beginning of this story. So a year or two ago, when you were asked to start looking at tools, can you tell us a little bit about how that started and the approach that you took to analyzing and evaluating different products?
Sure. So we had a failed low-code pilot previously. I think it was looking at like a K2 or something like that, some hybrid on-prem SaaS solution, and the project really didn't have any direction. It was it was a tool without a purpose, essentially, and so it never really went anywhere. And we always wanted to revisit low code because it seemed like something we should do, something interesting that could potentially enable citizen development on campus. And then we kind of figured out it actually might be the best way forward to migrate these legacy ASP.NET web apps that we've still got hanging around. This is a collection of 50 or 60 custom web applications that, most of them are just forms and workflow. And they would generate a lot of tickets for change this workflow routing item, change this piece of text, change this permission item, this open close date on this form. And so we figured we probably had better find a tool that could accomplish those goals of transitioning that legacy code base to something better, but also do it in such a way that our end users, our power users, our sort of campus IT partners would be the lingo that we use at Davidson. It would be easy enough for them to use, that they could then take ownership of these transition forms, maybe even make something of their own that they wanted to use without having to go through IT for permission. At the same time, we needed something that had the integration capabilities to allow us to pack as much integration punch into the tool as we could while also masking that complexity from the user. So yeah, we set out on this this task of evaluating all the tools on the market, and I'm going to let Luke and Tessa chime in with what that search was like.
Frustrating. As a person who comes from a web development background, low code is like kind of goes against the grain for me. It's like I build stuff. I don't use things to build stuff. And the most frustrating part about all of this was all these like full low code solutions. So I think some of the finalists that we looked at were like Appian and Mindex, and Betty Blocks was another one.
Yeah, and the Microsoft Power Platform as well.
Power Platform. Google Apps, I think, was another one, which doesn't exist anymore. So the frustrating part was the end result of what you got. Not only was like, even for me as a developer, it was hard for me to work in some of these applications. Like, Mindex said, you have to go through like 40 hours of training to become a basic novice Mindex user or something like that. So not only were they difficult for me to understand coming from a development background, but the end product was just what you created was not very robust, and it took a long time to go from nothing to something. And where I'm sitting there thinking like I could develop something in twice the time in half the effort. So we really were just thinking like, do any of these fit our Davidson use case? I mean, it's going to take so much time to rewrite these simple web apps in these monoliths of software that didn't even have a good end result. And then I think, Tessa, that's when you said, why don't we look for things that are in the low code realm but aren't the best of breed for low code, right?
Yeah, we had started kind of going down two paths. Like when we were looking for low code options, we were told to start with the Forrester and Gardner top sets. And that's where we did start. And we reached an end of our product search using those data sets. But back in the beginning, we'd also been tasked with completing a series of user interviews, people who were the primary owners for these web apps that JD mentioned that we were trying to replace. And it was through those interviews that we actually started to collect kind of a series of more user-centric requirements for what our low or no code solution looked like. So we got to the end of our original project. We weren't super thrilled with our final recommendation. And it was actually after JD told me to please stop looking at other things. Like he had an all-day meeting and I ignored him. And we actually looked at more outside things that we started finding kind of these like enterprise form solutions. And that's what we were looking at first. When I think Luke was the first person to find Kuali, which I misspelled for months. And then that quickly got us to, oh my gosh, not only is this a great product, but it fit our user stories and our use cases way better than any of the other things we had evaluated.
And I will say the two things, I don't know, I think we were just searching for form builders. Like it was through Google. But the two things that I think landed me on Kuali was first the web page, which said, you've tried Process Maker, you've tried Mindex, and they all don't work. And I was like, yeah, we're right there. That's where we are. And then the other thing was the exposed documentation and well-written documentation, which allowed me to get, without even having to start a trial, to get a really robust sense an intricate understanding of what the platform was capable of.
Nice. We have a question from the audience around how many students are at Davidson and how many users, internal partners do you work with?
So Davidson has about 2,000 students as a rough round number. And as for the size of like our power user slash like campus IT partner, IT stewardship realm, I want to say it's somewhere around like 20 or 30 like campus IT partners, people who perform some kind of IT style role around campus. But I think we've probably trained a greater number than that, especially if you consider folks who were the process owner for one of these web forms that we ended up converting. You know, an individual web form owner might have ownership over 5 or 6 web forms, and we've done 50 or 60 of them at this point. So I don't know. Does anybody know how many folks have gone through our training by now?
Yeah, we're approaching 80 people having gone through the training, and over a month back, so this number's changed, but we'd had at least 60 of those people like log in and either create their own app to work in or start working on one that someone else had started.
Great. Another question for our audience is, as you were doing this evaluation, was there a common set of use cases or user stories that you were trying to target to make sure that you addressed?
Yeah, we basically broke it up into 3 user story groups. And I'll try to articulate these as best I can without having them directly in front of me. But I think the first most basic one is that a user can create a Davidson branded web form that takes in basic plain text or other gadget style information without institutional data integration into the form. So you're not pulling in student data, you're not pulling in HR data, you're not sending it anywhere to any of those systems after the form is submitted. That's kind of like a basic Google form style use case, and a couple of our forms fell into that bucket. The second one is, a user can create a Davidson branded, easy to use web form with workflow and Davidson institutional data integration. So that means pulling in the aforementioned student records or employee records or what have you, a list of buildings, a list of events into the form, and also the ability to send form submissions to another system. And then the final one was essentially the full custom web app use case. So there are still a handful of applications that Build doesn't solve for. Things like our course registration tree, where students put in their course preferences and then an algorithm runs and selects, the courses that they're going to be registered for the next semester. And, that's a whole separate thing. Or like a custom directory. Those are things written in ASP.NET that we aren't trying to replicate and build. It just doesn't make sense. The thing is, at the end of the day, we found that 80 to 90% of the forms we had to convert fell into that second middle use case. A Davidson branded form with institutional data integration on the form side and on the workflow side. So like when we saw that number, when we ran the math, and Tessa and Luke did the diligent work of categorizing all that stuff, because that just takes time, that was just kind of a eureka aha moment. It's like, well, obviously we should pick a tool like Build. We clearly need to be focusing on forms and workflow, or BPM, I guess is the other industry initialism. So yeah, those were the 3 main categories of user stories we were focusing on.
Nice. So in the end, you chose Build. What were like the key factors for choosing Build over other options?
I remember Luke and I were sitting in the demo that you gave, Tadd, and we had this moment where we just kind of looked at each other across the table, and I think there were like 2 or 3 such moments. The first one that sticks out to me was the integrations portion of the demo, where it became clear that we could put in any integration target that we wanted, and then all that complexity, like the authorization, the field mapping, the HTTP method, all that stuff, the user wouldn't ever know about or have to care about any of that stuff. They could still easily select that integration when building their form. So we wanted to give them that power. We didn't want them to have to know what a bearer token was or what a JSON was. That's this. As soon as that appears on the screen for even our power users, I'm out of here. The second, I would say, was the ease of use of the form builder. It has a resemblance to some of the popular consumer form building tools. And that's not a slight by any means. It means that when users come to the tool, there are certain design conventions that they intuitively understand and that they have come to expect that this is how a form builder is going to work. And the third, without writing any checks that Tadd can't cash, was the price. We realized that we could actually afford this, and that it was well under budget for what we had been preparing for. Because we were talking to Ellucian, we were talking to, we were looking at these other low-code BPM tools that are more of a commercial market in addition to Ellucian's tool. And those are just in another realm. And they wouldn't have given us the value that Build has given us either. So, Luke, do you recall anything else from when we were making that call? Yeah.
During our proof of concept demo, there were at least three, but probably more, major updates to the software, and it seemed like the velocity and the cadence of improvements was so much higher than I had seen from a vendor. And so I realized that this was not going to be something that sat on a shelf and got a major release once every, 3 to 4 years. And then additionally, I think the support with, everything is like within the day. And so it felt like our size, and it felt like more of a collaboration than it was like, hey, here's my request, big giant company that has 40,000 employees, and then you hear back maybe never. So
yeah, there was also a moment where the team was headed out to a conference in Provo, Utah, and we were passing by the Kuali offices on the way there, and we decided to stop in because we were in our sandbox/trial period at the time. And I think we sat down with I think Katie was there, Tadd, I know you were there, and
engineers sat in.
Yeah, exactly. And y'all pulled up your GitHub issue board, like right in front of us, customers who hadn't even signed yet. And it was like a level of transparency. And first of all, we recognized like technologies that you were in the process of implementing on the issue board that we're like, oh, wow, this is headed in a really modern, forward-thinking direction. But second of all, just the fact that you even like showed that to us, it spoke to a level of transparency that we don't typically see in other vendors. And, now that purpose is fulfilled by the roadmap that you all have launched, which we also really appreciate. But yeah, you were willing to share that the product was evolving, and you showed us how you plan to evolve it in, weeks, not months, months, not years, as is the saying. So yeah, we felt really good about our decision at the time.
Excellent. So tell us about your experience with implementing Build. How did that go? What were some of the highlights of just getting things started?
I think we spent like the beginning of our implementation thinking we were going to have to do like a lot of design and setup around like several integrations, whether it was like users or groups or some of our core integrations for our forms. So we had this like really big chunk of time set aside. And I think as we like rolled into the implementation process, we very quickly realized it was even easier than we had thought. And that while like there's a lot that can be done with really intricate group setup, a relatively straightforward architecture worked best for us. So therefore we kind of went from like, okay, we're implementing this thing to, and now we're using it really quickly in comparison to some of the other implementations we've had.
Yeah, I think when we were starting to convert some of these web forms and working with users, and I've seen this over and over, and it varies from user to user. And when I say user, I mean like the end user, the person who's ultimately going to maintain and own this form that we are creating. Um, they tend to that I think the ease of use and the user interface of Kuali kind of eases them into uh, makes it makes that bite easier to swallow when we say, hey, we've maintained this form for you for so many years and now you've got to do it on your own. We haven't had any, in terms of ownership, we haven't had any pushback. Some people just need a little bit more, they need a little bit more help in terms of, well, especially with the, smart gadgets or advanced integrations, like, oh, what integration do I pick? But, because they're more afraid of doing something wrong because they've never had this level of ownership or agency over the form. But some people, once you give them the form, they're just like, all right, thanks, see ya. It's mine now. So
And they go
they go
create
nuts.
more.
Yeah, I think probably, and I don't, something that is nice that continues to happen that was unforeseen was when we are asked to sometimes help somebody with a form. We're expecting, to get on a Zoom call with them, and they're like, "All right, what do I do?" And when we have expected to like live build a form in front of them. But I'd say more often than not, when we arrive, they already have at least some basic structure built out. So they've gone into Kuali, they've they've done some trial and error on the form, tried out new gadgets, and then it's really they're trying to complete some bespoke task that takes just you got to learn how to do it once. So it's been, I think, even working with the users who not all are tech savvy has been a good experience as well in terms of our implementation.
As you started to set up your program, what have been like the high level goals of what you're trying to achieve with Build? Or how does Build fit into some other high level goal?
Sure. So I mean, the immediate goal was to get rid of those web apps, right? But beyond that, I described this a little bit yesterday in the COVID talk about how the perception of Build on campus has changed. The high level goal, or where Build fits in the ecosystem now, I would say is it's the low or no code front end that sits on top of our API and integration strategy. It lets us build applications in a mostly serverless way. We don't have to create custom web apps with dedicated servers or containers or any of that stuff to host individual business use case applications. Instead, now we focus on writing integrations or APIs that present data, and then we consume that with Build. And so it's just a force multiplier for that type of approach. It's so easy to build a front end that consumes your institutional data. I can't imagine going back to the way things used to be.
Diddy, do you want to talk about how the low code project fit into the strategic goal for the college?
In terms of like providing a better student experience, or
yeah, so like Davidson had that strategic goal around like digital accessibility. Mm-hmm. And it was really important that like T&I or our ITS department was like providing options that kind of fit in that overall trend of making like digital technology more accessible, not just to our faculty and staff, but to students. So that was one of the primary drivers behind kind of our internal interest in like a low code, no code solution. And I think that we did have this like really tangible goal of the web app migration, which was really nice. But now that we're a little bit more on the other side of implementation, I think we're seeing how we're also delivering on that large strategic goal of just making these digital components, whether it's Davidson information or integrations with our other systems, significantly more accessible to our users.
And also getting rid of, even if they were born digital via like a PDF file, getting rid of, so until this past year, the add drop form was a PDF the student downloaded, filled out, and then emailed back to the registrar. And the registrar, with I think some help from us, but at least setting up integrations, that is now a Kuali form that the students are using. So that type of, I think that's also where we've just come off a project where we've looked at, long-term document preservation and storage. And I can't tell you how many of the people we interviewed on that project told us that, like, one person I asked, is the only reason you need this feature, which the feature was to email or was to store an attachment from their email, is because you do not have a digital form for this. And they were like, yeah, that's all of our processes. They're all PDFs that people download and fill out and email back to us. And I mean, now that Kuali has like e-signatures, I mean, a lot of these processes can move to Kuali. That ball is rolling, and that snowball is starting to build. Yeah.
Nice.
Completely agree.
How have you opened up the ability to create applications? Have you made that available to like all authenticated users, or do you like do some access control around that?
So yeah, any user who with the Davidson account can sign in to build and create applications. Again, one of the things we liked about the Kuali Build licensing model, I don't know if this is still true, but it was the ability to create unlimited apps, to not have to worry about the number of users. So we didn't have to sit there and try to, count grains of rice as to who was going to be doled out this permission or that permission, so that we didn't go over some artificial ceiling to our users' creativity for this kind of stuff. So yeah, anybody can create an app. I'd say the one frontier that we still need to cross is around integration permissioning. So, you might have integrations in your system. And I mean, of course, we all have data elements in our SIS or HRIS that are sensitive, and we only want certain people to be able to call. So I know that Kuali is working in the very near future on some integration permissioning capabilities, so that not just anyone building an app can drop the lookup employee sensitive employee data integration into their app. So that's one area we have to get a bit creative and add some kind of passphrase or other authorization parameter to allow people to use those in their apps.
And how do you make students, and this is a question from Angela, thank you. Mm-hmm. How do you make students aware of how to access these forms, and faculty for that matter? Where do they go to find these things and fill them out?
So I'd say for the most part, form fillers don't really use like the Kuali homepage. They don't go to Kuali Build as a destination to find forms that they can fill out. Instead, we're usually talking about a form that gets posted on a departmental website or gets emailed directly to the form filler. So, for example, I've been doing a lot of forms for public safety lately. So like where there used to be a link to the old bicycle registration ASP.NET web app, that's been replaced with a link to the build form. And that story is just repeated over and over again. One thing we've thought about doing is using a link shortener. We're currently exploring short.io for this purpose, which Blake has been working hard to implement. Creating some kind of simple redirect to shorten the URLs for build forms. So like forms.davidson.edu/bike registration, for example. That's part of the approach that we use to get the word out about forms that need to be completed.
Okay, so let's turn to integrations and connecting to other systems. You've used the SnapLogic product to do this extensively. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of systems you connect to on campus and what you've done with SnapLogic?
Luke, I want you to lead this one, and then I want to hear from Blake and Tessa as well about some of the work that y'all have done on this area.
Well, I will first say, which also speaks to the question. So we use Banner as our sys, and so I want to preface everything I say to, if you have an API to your system, you can connect Kuali to it. So for example, Banner's API is Ethos, and if we had implemented Ethos, we could connect Kuali to Ethos. Or if you have PeopleSoft, you can connect Kuali to PeopleSoft. We do not have Ethos, and the only way we can tap into Banner is making direct database calls, which is not great. So we have a product that sits on top of that called SnapLogic, which is it's effectively like a graphical user interface for writing extract, transform, load pipeline. So get me all the people from Banner, transform it, clean up the data, and then send it somewhere. One of the things that SnapLogic can do is it can expose that pipeline via an HTTP call. So, Davidson.snaplogic.edu/people, and then we can get that data back. So that's how we've integrated our sys into Kuali. We are currently on a project where we are writing, creating the version 1 of a Davidson API, and what that looks like is we have these pipelines running to get data out of Banner, and they put them into this this interstitial database that we call a domain data store. And we are currently going to convert all of our integrations to pull from this API. So again, if you have an API, you can hook Kuali into it. And the only reason that we have this additional layer of SnapLogic is that our main system of record, Banner, does not have an API.
I'll build on that a little bit. So we have really leaned hard into SnapLogic, mostly for being able to perform advanced kind of data manipulation, data munging between our systems of record and providing an integration to Kuali, whether that's routing or splitting or modifying. We're able to do all of that in between work in SnapLogic so that we have really specific data coming out in Kuali to fit our different form use cases. I think that overall process has gone so well that a lot of the forms back when we were ranking them for a migration that we originally listed as, oh, this just needs to be a basic form, have quickly kind of caught on and seen like, oh, this form could be even better if it had integrations. So I think we actually have very few forms at this point that aren't using an integration of some sort, because it's so powerful to have those autofill capabilities and to leverage the institutional data we already have. But with that in mind, we've seen our need for like real-time data returns at like higher volumes, more complex multi-part calls kind of go through the roof. And it's really with those real-time requirements and those high volume loads that we've had this delightful push for us to shift towards a Davidson API so that we can meet those needs. But some of the intricacies of our SnapLogic use case, I'm going to let Blake talk about, because she's done some really cool things like the lost and found form.
Yeah, absolutely. So the really powerful thing about SnapLogic in tandem with Kuali is that you can sort of, if you use a workflow integration, you can accept data from Kuali and then put it anywhere. So several months ago, we ended up working on a Kuali Build form that was a lost and found, and it would grab all of the lost and found items from a table in a Zendesk Help Center article, and it would update that table and publish it. So you could sort of see real-time updates to things that people have lost and found. And yeah, all that data was coming from Kuali. The Zendesk article itself linked to the Kuali form for people to fill out, but then rather than people looking at the documents view, they could view it right in Zendesk, so they could search for things they lost. So yeah, we've used it in tandem with Smartsheet, lots of different tools. It's really powerful, especially with Kuali.
Yeah, some of the more complex use cases you've worked on recently is around the music ensemble registration form, that kind of stuff. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a pretty robust music program. We offer private lessons and also ensembles, but students have to register for all of that. So I have written many integrations to power all of that. The most recent one being a little registration checker. So as data comes into the form, it sends the data to this integration that checks like, okay, here's the campus ID number, and here's the instructor, and here is the term. Have you registered with this instructor already? Did you register last term for 2 terms? You know, like it really hits that database and does a pretty rigorous check to prevent duplicate registrations and other nonsense that was kind of bogging people down when they were trying to register using the legacy web apps. But yeah, it's been fantastic to work really closely with the people providing these forms and sort of creating something that they wouldn't have even thought of before they came in contact with Kuali.
Nice. Getting rid of the nonsense. I like that. We're going to put that in some marketing work. In the fall, you rolled out a contactless check-in process for students who needed to do a weekly COVID test. Could you tell us a little bit about that solutions, the different systems that are involved, and how Build played a part in that?
Sure. So I told a little bit of this story yesterday at the COVID session, and there will be a recording of that available, I'm sure, if you want to go more into detail. But if you all think back to this summer of this past year and how chaotic things were, as we were all trying to figure out, are we going to bring our students back to campus? If we do, how are we going to keep them safe? I got the call, I think it was like on a Wednesday in early August from our CIO and my director. And they said, you have 10 days to build a COVID test attendance tracking process. There's no prescribed tool for you to do this. You just need to figure it out. So after I finished sobbing into my shirt and stress eating pizza, I called Tessa and said like, hey, how are we going to do this? How are we going to pull this off? And one of the systems we considered was using our card system's native functionality for logging transactions. But it turned out that our card system, it doesn't have the ability to it doesn't have workflow. So, it doesn't kick off events to other systems. There's no ability to retry an integration step. And everything's recorded as this fake transaction that has to be downloaded from an export at the last 5 minutes of transactions in a specific category. It just wasn't a great fit. So, we managed to prototype something in Build and had it up and running really quickly within just a couple of days. The specific requirement is that you be able to take your Davidson contactless card, tap it on a reader, and that contactless card number would then look up information about the student or staff member who's standing in front of the person operating the check-in booth for the COVID test site. So the form itself is very simple. You've got 3 inputs, one for contactless card, one for user lookup as an alternative, and another one where you just type in the person's banner ID number. If they are, say, like a temp or a vendor who doesn't have a user in Kuali and they don't have a card either. So we wrote an integration that looks up one of those 3 input fields and pulls up their, preferred name, date of birth, and some other basics. Are they a student? What class are they? So that when they tap their card, and we click submit, not only can we, register their attendance at the site, but we can greet them and say, hey, thank you for coming, John, right this way. Over time, that particular integrations had to evolve, moving from SnapLogic to an Azure Function app that reads a Redis cache, because the longer students stand in a queue at the COVID test site, the less their social distancing, the more they start to wonder whether they really should have showed up for this test today in the first place. You want to provide a better, more responsive user experience. Behind the scenes on that, Tessa wrote this really incredible reconciliation process that she can briefly describe.
Yeah, so situational context, we had around 1,800 students on campus in the fall, including a few hundred who were living off campus but were coming to campus. So in terms of contact tracing, they were considered on campus. And at that point, we were testing every single student at least once a week. At this point, we've escalated to twice a week for safety precautions, but that meant that the process of determining who was supposed to come what day, who had come and who hadn't come, and who needs to make it up tomorrow, was this like 7-hour massive 2 spreadsheets highlighter session for our COVID testing site coordinator. And she's an absolute superhero, but spending like 3 to 7 hours each night attempting to do this reconciliation process by hand so that she could provide real-time reports to some of our other COVID committee around compliance for testing and pacing, and determining, do we need more people who are performing the test? Can we reduce their hours? Can we shift it so that we need 2 windows? Needed to be performed in a better process. So again, we kind of pulled together our 2 favorite things at the time, which was Build and SnapLogic. We paired those with what I'm going to call a database, because our power users needed to have really quick access. So we used a Smartsheet and essentially created a record for every student that listed their testing group, which mapped to a day of the week that they were supposed to test. And that lived in Smartsheet. So then at the end of each testing day, we had our COVID testing site admin complete a form in Kuali Build where they were able to select which group should have been tested that day. And that kicked off a process that reached out to JD's Kuali Build app and essentially consumed all of the people who had tested that day, and then runs a comparison against the Smartsheet, which lists all the people who should have been tested that day, and creates a receipt for each student and updates additional columns in those Smartsheets so that the admins can determine overall compliance and usage information. And then some kind of summary data from that process is then returned back to the original Kuali form. And then we use workflow to send emails out to people who really need that quick real-time summary of students who should have attended but didn't, or students who have become exempt and we didn't expect that.
I know we're at time, but I just wanted to drop the stat that this is by far our most popular use case for Build on campus. And I just checked, we've crossed 57,000 submissions in that app. So the platform is held up really admirably in that regard.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for coming here and spending the time with us and sharing this with us. I have to tell you, from our side, you have just been great customers to work with, great partners and collaborators, and it's been a delight for our team to work with you, and that's been part of the fun for us. It's also just fun to watch what you've done with Build. You've done many things that we never expected, and it's just been really fun to see that experience. For all those, if you have any outstanding questions, you can reach us at build@kuali.com, code via email. And I want to remind everyone that we have a contest going on to win a free Build app. You can sign up, you could scan this QR code, or you can sign up at kuali.co/contest. And that will do. Thank you very much for all your time. Thank you.